The words came through the thin wood of the hallway door, clear and sharp as shards of glass. Why is she even still alive? It was my daughter-in-law, Keisha, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur that carried none of the syrupy sweetness she used to my face. A beat of silence followed, a space where I held my breath, praying I had misheard, that my 72-year-old ears were finally failing me. But then came the sound that truly broke me. It was not a loud laugh, not a guffaw, but a short, choked chuckle from my son, my only child, Malik. It was a sound of agreement, of shared sentiment, a little puff of air that extinguished the last flickering ember of hope I had for our relationship. I stood frozen in the dim hallway, the tray of iced tea and lemon cookies I had prepared for them suddenly feeling as heavy as a tombstone in my hands. The condensation from the pitcher dripped onto the worn floral runner, each drop a tiny cold punctuation mark to their cruelty. Why is she even still alive? The question echoed in the cavern of my skull, ricocheting off decades of memories, each one a sacrifice I had willingly, lovingly made. I retreated silently, my slippered feet making no sound on the old wood floors. I placed the tray on the kitchen counter with hands that trembled so violently the cookies rattled on the plate. I sank into one of the breakfast nook chairs, the vinyl cool against my skin, and stared out at the sprawling backyard my late husband, Robert, and I had so carefully cultivated. The azaleas were in full bloom, a riot of pink and white against the deep green of the St. Augustine grass. For 45 years this house had been my world, my sanctuary, my life's work. Every nail hammered, every wall painted, every meal cooked within these four walls had been an act of love for my family. For Robert, whose memory was a gentle ghost that still sat with me in the evenings, and for Malik, the boy I had poured my entire existence into. From the moment he was born, my life had reoriented itself around his. I was the mother who never missed a school play, who baked 3 dozen cupcakes at a moment's notice, who stayed up all night helping him cram for exams he had neglected to study for. When he wanted the expensive sneakers all his friends had, Robert and I ate beans and rice for a month to afford them. When he decided he needed a car to be popular in high school, we took out a second mortgage on this very house, a fact he never knew. His desires became our necessities. His comfort was our life's mission. I never saw it as a burden. I saw it as the very definition of motherhood. I was providing. I was nurturing. I was loving him in the only way I knew how, by giving him everything I had and then some. When he met Keisha in college, I welcomed her with an open heart. She was sharp and ambitious, with a smile that could charm a snake. I saw the way Malik looked at her and I was happy for him. I ignored the little warning signs, the way her eyes would scan our home, not with warmth, but with a cool, appraising gaze, as if she were taking inventory. I dismissed the casual, backhanded compliments she would give. "Oh, Marian, this old thing is so quaint," she would say about a piece of furniture I cherished. "It's amazing how you've made do for all these years." I told myself it was just a generational difference, that her modern sensibilities clashed with my traditional ones. I wanted to love her because Malik loved her. So I opened my home and my wallet to her as well. Their wedding was a lavish affair we could not afford, but they insisted. "It's our one special day, Mom," Malik had said, his voice laced with that familiar tone of gentle entitlement. "We just want it to be perfect." And so, I drained a significant portion of the savings Robert and I had painstakingly built for our own old age. I wore a simple dress from a department store so Keisha could have her designer gown. I watched them toast with champagne that cost more per bottle than my weekly grocery budget, and I smiled until my face ached, telling myself this was an investment in their happiness. But the investments never stopped. There was the down payment on their first condo, a loan that was never spoken of again. There were the countless emergencies, a car repair, a vet bill for their designer dog, a last-minute vacation they simply had to take to de-stress. My savings account, once a healthy cushion, became their personal, no-limit line of credit. The phone would ring, and it would be Keisha's bright, False voice on the other end. Marian, sweetie. How are you? We were just thinking about you. The preamble was always the same. A sugary coating over the bitter pill of the request that was sure to follow. You know, Malik's been working so hard, and his car is just acting up again. We were wondering if you could possibly see your way to helping us out, just until his bonus comes in. The bonus never seemed to materialize, but my money always did. I would transfer the funds, my heart sinking a little each time. A small voice in the back of my mind whispering that something was wrong. But I would silence it with excuses. He's my son. They're just starting out. This is what a mother does. The disrespect was more subtle at first. A slow-growing weed in the garden of our family. They would show up for Sunday dinner an hour late, offering flimsy excuses as they immediately started filling their plates. They would talk over me, their eyes glued to their phones while I tried to share a story about my week. Keisha took to redecorating my guest room without asking, replacing my comfortable, familiar linens with stark, modern ones that felt cold and alien. Just freshening the place up for you, Marian, she'd said with a dismissive wave of her hand. It was my house, but I was slowly being made to feel like a guest in it, a relic from a bygone era that they were politely tolerating. My opinions were outdated, my stories were boring. My very presence was an inconvenience. Now, sitting in my kitchen, the truth of it all crashed down on me, not like a wave, but like a building collapsing. Their words weren't just a thoughtless comment. They were a summary, the final brutal truth of how they saw me. I was not a mother, not a grandmother-to-be, not a person. I was an obstacle, a burden, an annuity that had not yet matured. My continued existence was an inconvenience to their inheritance. The house, the remaining savings, the life insurance policy Robert had left, it was all they saw when they looked at me. My breath hitched in my chest, a sob catching in my throat so sharp and painful it felt like I had swallowed broken glass. The laugh. It was Malik's quiet laugh that haunted me most. It was the sound of betrayal in its purest form. I did not cry. Not then. The shock was too deep, a cold numbness that spread from my heart through every limb. I heard the scrape of chairs from the living room, the murmur of their voices as they got up to leave. I remained perfectly still, a statue of a forgotten woman in her own kitchen. I heard the front door open and close. I heard their car start, the engine a familiar rumble that now sounded like a threat. And then silence. The silence in the house was no longer peaceful. It was immense, suffocating, a heavy blanket woven from years of self-deception and misplaced love. For hours I sat in that chair, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that I could not appreciate. The beauty of the world felt like a mockery. How could I have been so stupid? The question was a relentless tormentor. How could I have ignored so many red flags? The casual dismissal, the constant financial drain, the utter lack of genuine affection? I had constructed a fantasy in my mind, a beautiful story of a devoted son and a loving family, and I had papered over every crack in the facade with my own money and my own desperate need to be needed. I had made myself essential to their lives not through love, but through utility. And now my utility was wearing thin. I was just an old woman waiting to die so they could finally cash in. Sometime after midnight, the numbness began to recede, and in its place something else began to grow. It started as a small, hard knot in the pit of my stomach. It was not sadness. I had moved past sadness. It was rage. A cold, clear, crystalline rage that burned away the fog of my grief and left behind a terrifying clarity. I stood up from the chair, my joints stiff, and walked to the hall bathroom. I flipped on the light and looked at my reflection in the mirror. I saw the tired lines around my eyes, the silver in my hair, the slight stoop in my shoulders. For years I had seen a woman fading, a person gradually becoming invisible. But tonight I saw something new in my eyes. A hardness. A glint of steel that had been forged in the fires of betrayal. The woman in the mirror was not a victim. Not anymore. She was a survivor and she was done being quiet. I went to my husband's old office, a room I rarely used anymore, and pulled a dusty ledger from the bottom drawer of his desk. For the next 3 hours I performed a grim accounting. With a pen and a pad of paper I started to write. I went through old bank statements I had kept, checkbook registers, credit card bills. I listed everything I could remember. The $5,000 for their wedding caterer. The $20,000 for the condo down payment. The $300 here for a car payment, the $500 there for a dental emergency. I tallied up the plane tickets for their anniversary trip to Hawaii. The designer handbag I bought Keisha for a birthday she forgot to thank me for. The endless stream of cash for groceries, utilities, and whims. The list grew, page after page of my neat, cursive script detailing a decade of one-sided generosity. As the sun began to stream through the window, casting long shadows across the room, I wrote down the final number. I stared at it, my hand trembling slightly. It was a staggering amount, enough to have funded a comfortable, worry-free retirement for myself. It was the price of my blindness. It was the cost of their love, a love that had never been real in the first place. Seeing it all there in black and white did not make me sad. It solidified the rage in my chest into a solid column of purpose. This was not just a list of money. It was a list of my life, my sacrifices, my very essence, which they had consumed without a second thought. My first act was small, but it felt monumental. I picked up my smartphone, a gift from my granddaughter Ayana that Malik and Keisha always made fun of me for fumbling with. I opened my contacts. I found Malik's name. For a moment I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. A lifetime of maternal instinct screamed at me to stop. But then I heard it again, that quiet, dismissive chuckle. My thumb came down. I pressed block this caller. A confirmation popped up. I pressed block contact. I did the same for Keisha. The silence that followed was different this time. It was not the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of sovereignty. The next morning I called my neighbor Gloria. Gloria was a widow like me. A sharp, funny woman who had seen more of life than most. We had a standing coffee date on our respective front porches every morning. When she answered, I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Gloria," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need some advice." I invited her over, and as we sat in the kitchen that had been the scene of my breakdown just hours before, I told her everything. I told her about the constant financial drain, the years of disrespect, and finally, the words I had overheard in the hallway. I expected her to be shocked, to offer platitudes. Instead, she just nodded slowly, her expression grim. "Marion," she said, reaching across the table to pat my hand, "I'm not surprised. I'm just sorry it took you this long to hear it. I've seen the way they treat you. They pull up in their fancy car, a car you probably paid for, and they walk into your house like they own it already." Her validation was a balm on my raw nerves. You are not their piggy bank, and you are not their doormat. So the question is, what are you going to do about it? "I'm going to sell the house," I said, the words coming out before I had even fully formed the thought. Gloria's eyebrows shot up. "Well, I'll be. You're not wasting any time, are you?" A slow smile spread across her face. "Good for you. This house is too much for you anyway. Too many rooms, too many memories, too many ghosts." Her support bolstered my resolve. That same day, Gloria gave me the number of a real estate agent she trusted, a woman named Carol. I also knew I needed legal advice. I didn't want a stuffy old man who would pat my hand and call me dear. I wanted a shark. I found a law firm downtown run entirely by women. I made an appointment with a Ms. Evelyn Reed, a lawyer whose online profile picture showed a woman with intelligent eyes and an expression that said she didn't suffer fools gladly. My meeting with Ms. Reed was a revelation. I sat in her sleek, modern office and laid out the entire story, including the ledger I had compiled. She listened patiently, her face unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Marion," she began, her voice calm and professional, What your son and daughter-in-law have been doing is called financial elder abuse. It is predatory and it is vile. You have every right to cut them off, sell your assets, and live your life exactly as you see fit. She didn't coddle me. She armed me. She explained my rights, the legal steps to protect my assets, and how to handle any potential blowback from Malik and Keisha. For the first time in years I felt powerful. I felt seen not as a frail old woman, but as a competent adult taking control of her life. I retained her on the spot. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of quiet, purposeful activity. Carol, the real estate agent, was a dynamo. She came to the house, made suggestions for staging, and had a photographer in and out in an afternoon. A for sale sign was hammered into my front lawn, a bold declaration of my independence. I began the Herculean task of sorting through 45 years of life. I was ruthless. I packed the things that held meaning for me and Robert. I designated the furniture they had always coveted for a donation truck. Keisha had always gone on about her love for my antique mahogany dining set. The thought of her smug face as she served dinner on it to her friends made my decision easy. It would go to a family who would actually appreciate it. It took less than a week for the storm to break. My phone, blessedly silent from their calls, started lighting up with texts from numbers I didn't recognize. Their friends, no doubt, enlisted as flying monkeys. Then came the emails. But the real confrontation happened on a Saturday afternoon. I was in the garden, pruning Robert's rose bushes, when their luxury SUV screeched to a halt at the curb. They stormed up the walkway, their faces masks of fury. "What is the meaning of this?" Malik demanded, gesturing wildly at the for sale sign as if it had personally assaulted him. "A for sale sign? On our house?" "It's my house, Malik," I said, my voice even. I did not get up from my knees. I continued to snip a dead bloom from a rose bush. "Why aren't you answering our calls? We've been worried sick." Keisha chimed in, her voice dripping with false concern. It was a pathetic performance. "I blocked your numbers," I said simply, looking up at them. Their shocked expressions were almost comical. There was nothing more I needed to hear from either of you. "Mom, have you lost your mind?" Malik's voice rose, cracking with panic. "You can't sell this house. This is our family home. This is our inheritance." There it was. The truth, finally spoken aloud in the clear light of day. It wasn't about family or memories. It was about money. It had always been about money. I rose slowly, my knees aching, and brushed the dirt from my hands. I looked my son in the eye. "The Bank of Marion is closed," I said, the words as crisp and final as the snap of my pruning shears. "Permanently. This is my property, and I will do with it as I please. You are no longer welcome here. If you do not leave, I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing," Keisha gasped, clutching her chest in a display of theatrical outrage. "You would call the police on your own son?" "I would call the police on a stranger who is screaming at me on my own property," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "And right now that is all you are to me." They stood there sputtering, their sense of entitlement so profound they could not comprehend this new reality. They tried threats. They tried guilt. They even tried questioning my mental competence, suggesting I was a confused old woman being taken advantage of by a predatory real estate agent. I simply stood my ground, my silence a more powerful weapon than any argument I could have made. Finally, defeated and enraged, they stormed back to their car and sped away, leaving a trail of righteous indignation in their wake. I watched them go, and I did not feel a shred of regret. I only felt the clean, bracing air of freedom. The one person I did reach out to was my granddaughter, Ayana. She was Malik's daughter from his first marriage, a bright, kind young woman who was studying to be a nurse. Keisha had always treated her with a cool distance, and as a result, Ayana's visits had become less frequent over the years. I called her and asked her to meet me for lunch. I told her my plan, bracing myself for confusion or judgment. Instead, her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Grandma," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I knew they were selfish, but I never imagined. I'm so proud of you for doing this." Her unconditional support was a gift. She offered to help me pack, to help me find a new place, to just be there. In her I saw the family I had always yearned for, one built on genuine love and respect, not on transactions. The house sold in 2 weeks for more than I had ever dreamed. The closing was a simple, quiet affair. I signed the papers, and the title of the house, the physical manifestation of my old life, passed into the hands of a young family with bright-eyed children. I watched them through the window of the car as Ayana drove me away, and I felt a pang of nostalgia, but it was quickly replaced by a profound sense of relief. I was untethered. I found a small 2-bedroom apartment in a modern building with a gym and a pool. It was clean and bright, with a balcony that overlooked a small park. It was less than a third of the size of my old house, and I loved it with an intensity that surprised me. Every piece of furniture, every picture on the wall was something I had chosen, something that brought me joy. There were no ghosts here. There were no bitter memories clinging to the corners of the rooms. It was a blank slate. It was mine. My new life began to take shape, built not on grand gestures but on a collection of small intentional joys. I woke up when I wanted to. I had coffee on my balcony, listening to the birds instead of the silent hum of a house that was too big and too empty. I went for long walks in the park. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected in the fog of my family obligations. Gloria and I explored new cafes. Ayana and I had a standing movie night every Friday. I started volunteering at the local library, reading stories to children, their innocent, happy faces a balm to my soul. My days were filled with my own choices. I ate what I wanted, watched what I wanted, listened to the music I loved at a volume Malik had always complained was too loud. The quiet of my apartment was a peaceful symphony of my own making. I was no longer waiting for the phone to ring with the next demand. I was no longer bracing myself for the next casual cruelty. I was simply living. One afternoon I sat down with my financial advisor, another sharp woman recommended by Ms. Reed. We reviewed my finances. With the proceeds from the sale of the house, I was more than comfortable. I was secure. I had enough to live well, to travel, to never worry about money again. And I had enough to do something more. I thought about all the years I had poured my resources into a black hole of entitlement. I thought about the woman I had been, so desperate for approval that I had allowed myself to be erased. I decided my money would no longer be used to enable the greedy. It would be used to empower the vulnerable. I made a substantial, anonymous donation to a local shelter for women fleeing domestic and financial abuse. I wrote the check with a steady hand, and as I sealed the envelope, I felt a sense of purpose that had been missing for decades. My pain was being transformed into someone else's protection. My story, in some small way, would become part of another woman's survival. I did hear from Malik and Keisha one last time. A formal, threatening letter arrived from a lawyer they had hired, demanding a full accounting of my assets and claiming I was mentally unfit to manage my own affairs. They were attempting to have me declared incompetent so they could gain control of my estate. I laughed. It was a real, genuine laugh, bubbling up from a place of pure, unadulterated freedom. I simply forwarded the letter to Ms. Reed. Her response, I was told, was a masterclass in legal evisceration. I never heard from them again. Their power over me was gone. Their names became whispers from a past life, a story I told myself to remember how far I had come. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I sit on my balcony and look out at the city lights. I think about the woman I was, the one who stood in a dim hallway with a tray of cookies, her world crumbling around her. I feel a great wave of compassion for her loneliness and her pain. But I am not her anymore. The question Keisha asked that day, why is she even still alive? I finally have the answer. I am alive to see the sunrise from my own balcony. I am alive to hear my granddaughter's laughter. I am alive to feel the warmth of the sun on my face during a walk in the park. I am alive to be the author of my own days, to fill them with peace and purpose and small simple joys. I am alive finally for myself. And it is more than enough. It is everything.